Hello, I'm Bailey Leisure, and this is my 2018 Major League Baseball trade deadline recap, as well as the rest of July recap, as I will be recapping the trade deadline moves, as well as some of the action that's gone on in Major League Baseball since the All-Star break. So, to start off the video, I'm going to talk about many of the top trade deadline moves that were made since the All-Star break, as well as what happened today as I'm recording this July 31st, which was the trade deadline. I'm not going to talk about all of them, but I will be talking about some of the big ones, and I'm going to start off with the big one, the top one a lot of teams were going after, which was Manny Machado. He ultimately went to the Dodgers, and the Baltimore got 5 prospects back for him. Overall, I think LA, they had, being the big, what the farm system they have, the payroll they have, they wanted to make another run at the World Series and wanted to be the front runner in not only their division, but as well as the National League. And they did this. I think since he brings not only the bat to bring more pop into the lineup, but he also brings, some depth, knowing that he's played shortstop and third base, with the fact that Justin Turner's been experiencing injuries and Corey Seager's out for the rest of the season. It's definitely a good move for them. And you never know, with the payroll they have, they would love to keep him in the future. So we'll see what happens there. But the top player, Manny Machado, goes to the Dodgers. So moving on to the next player that was moved, Cleveland trying to put some pieces together to kind of get them on par with the Astros, Yankees, and Red Sox. They went out and got some bullpen help, especially with the bullpen struggling so far this year for them. They got Brad Ham from the San Diego Padres. This was a good deal for them to improve the bullpen. Some other bullpen moves that were made. Urus Familia went to the Oakland A's. Mets were not huge sellers like people thought they should have been, but they sold Familia to Oakland. Oakland, one of the surprise teams that's in the playoff hunt, and they went out and got him. Zach Britton, who was another top player, probably the next player expected to go, he went as he went to the New York Yankees. They traded for some guys. I think overall the Yankees helped their bullpen out. They definitely went after pitching in this trade deadline and trying to get on par with the Red Sox pitching and the Astros pitching, as they will be competing with them. So after Britton went to the the Yankees, Nathan Eovaldi was then acquired from the Tampa Bay Rays. The Rays were big sellers at the deadline, and they traded him to the Boston Red Sox. This was a move that the Red Sox made after the Britton deal, and I think overall a good deal for them. He was impressive in his first start, and the Yankees countered with that, knowing that they've had a little bit of some depth issues with Tanaka and Sabathia behind Luis Severino, who's been one of the best pitchers in the American League. They went out and got J.A. Happ from Toronto. He was impressive in his first start, although he's out right now with foot, hands, and mouth disease, as he is the second player that has been diagnosed with that in the majors, along with Noah Syndergaard. They traded Brandon Drury and Billy McKinney. I think it was a good haul for Toronto, who were sellers. I think it was a good move, especially with Brandon Drury not really doing anything with the Yankees. I think overall it was a good move for them, and the Yankees and the Red Sox were kind of neck and neck at the trade deadline this year. So some other moves that happened later on the last couple weeks, last 2 weeks specifically. The Cubs were Cole Hamels, not a huge market as last year was in the starting pitching. Compared with Justin Verlander. But Cole Hamels, he went to the Cubs. Cubs acquired him. I think the Cubs are looking for some pitching depth behind John Lester, as Kyle Hendricks, Jose Quintana, and Tyler Chatwood have not been as great. And Yu Darvish, their big acquisition in the offseason, has unfortunately been injured a lot for most of the season. So they were definitely looking for that. And I think it was a good move when it came to that. The Yankees also, they went after Lance Lynn, for Minnesota, as I talked about some of the depth they needed. They went after starting pitching, and I think that was a good part on the Yankees for doing that. So overall, it was a good move for some more starting pitching. So as I've talked about the Yankees and Red Sox and the moves they've made, the team that not only, despite looking as well as they did last year, if not better, the Astros, they made a couple of trade deadlines. They were linked to some of those guys like Brad Hand and Zach Britton, and despite not getting them, they went after kind of the controversial choice, which was Roberto Ozuna. From a pitcher-wise, good, but he's been in the news a lot. He's been serving a 75-game suspension for the domestic violence case that he's being, as I believe, is being pursued legally from a charge, or has been charged with it, and suspended 75 games. He is eligible to play in the postseason, and the suspension will, as I'm recording this, will be done on Sunday. So he will be eligible to pitch in the postseason for them. They traded their troubled guy who's had some trouble in the bullpen, Ken Giles. This has definitely been a big controversial thing that I'm not going to get into, but it's definitely brought up the issue of why is this guy eligible for the postseason? This has been a big topic in sports. Meanwhile, a guy like Robinson Cano, he's ineligible for the postseason, even though he'll be coming back, but he's serving an 80-game suspension for a PED offense, and he's not eligible for the postseason. So it's definitely a big thing I'm not going to get into, but the Astros made a move in their bullpen, and they made a controversial one, to say the least. So the Phillies made a couple moves in a tight National League East and tight National League wild card race. They made a couple moves. One of those moves was to get Asdrubal Cabrera from the Mets. I think overall a good move to help their infield. And they also went after a guy that the Nationals were looking at, Wilson Ramos from Tampa Bay, as part of the Tampa Bay, not really fire sale, but kind of more towards the rebuild and being sellers at this trade deadline. I think overall, great bats to get for the Phillies, along with some of those guys like Rhys Hoskins. So I think the Phillies, knowing what the Braves and their lineup has been with guys like Freddie Freeman and Ozzie Albies and Ronald Acuna Jr. and some of those guys like that, I think they definitely knew they had to make a move. The Braves made a big move in their lineup by getting Adam Duvall from the Cincinnati Reds. Those teams made several trades, and I'm not going to talk about that, but those were definitely the big bats that they probably needed, and it's going to be a tight race in the National League East. So what I noticed this trade deadline was there was a lot of infielders that were traded. Probably the one area of the field, that was moved a lot. The Red Sox got Ian Kinsler from the Angels. Brian Dozier, who was linked to a lot of teams, he went to the LA Dodgers, and the Dodgers definitely got some big infielders there. But overall, that was a move that happened. The Brewers paid a couple ones that were kind of head scratchers. So they went out and got Mike Moustakas from the Royals, which brought up the question of should Travis Straw play for, he's never played second base, and now he's currently playing that. And then they went out and got Jonathan Scoop from the Baltimore Orioles. And so now there's a question, should Mike Moustakas play second base now? So they have a really crowded infield. So after going out in the offseason and getting a ton of outfielders, such as Lorenzo King and Christian Yelich, they went out and got a bunch of infielders. And there's a lot of question marks there from the infielders of who's going to play where. So kind of some head scratchers. So I've talked about in my last couple videos of how tight of a race it is in many divisions, especially the National League West. The Diamondbacks, you knew that Mike Hazen had to make some deal after the Manny Machado and now the Brian Dozier deal. What would he make? There was several positions that he needed to address, especially the infield, and he got one of them. He went out and got Eduardo Escobar from the Minnesota Twins. Didn't really have to give up much. He only had to give up in this trade. In this trade deadline, I think he only had to give up one top 20 prospect for the Arizona Diamondbacks. So overall, pretty good moves for Mike Hazen. But Eduardo Escobar, I've looked at some of the comments about this guy. I think overall he's an all-around good player and a good infielder, and he can play several positions if you need to. A lot of people called him the poor man's Manny Machado. I'm not sure I'd go as far, but I think from a production purpose, he is a good player. He's got a decent bat. I think he's got a good glove. So overall, I think it was definitely something they definitely needed to address the third base position, especially with Jake Lamb's injuries this year and also his struggles. So I think they were able to do that. And since the Dodgers went out and got some bats, the Diamondbacks needed to improve their bullpen. And today, I think they did a good job of improving their bullpen by going out. They went out and reacquired a former closer that they had, Brad Ziegler. Now, despite his .398 ERA that he's had this season, in his last 2 months he's played, He's had an under 1 ERA, and I think overall it's definitely a great deal from the Miami Marlins, not having to give up much. I think only like a prospect or two, and to get the remaining of his under $3 million deal, or $3 million remaining on his contract, as he'll be a free agent at the end of the year. But overall, pretty good move. And the Diamondbacks went out and got Jake Diekman from the Texas Rangers. They were currently playing the Texas Rangers, and so he just had to switch clubhouses. So overall, I think the Diamondbacks, they made some good, decent moves to contend in the National League West and contend to that loaded National League. So overall, I think they made good moves, and it's going to be a tight race, like I've said before, for the rest of the way. And the final news I'm going to talk about regarding the trade deadline was the Pittsburgh Pirates news. They made a couple moves. Last night, they went out and got Keon Kela, if I'm saying that right, hopefully, from the Texas Rangers, helping their bullpen out after the Pirates have really been on a good stretch lately in their last 20 games. And they made the guy a lot of teams were linked for in the starting pitchers. They went after Chris Archer from the Tampa Bay Rays. I think Pittsburgh, they're contenders for a playoff spot, but they're coming off selling some of their big assets in the offseason, and Andrew McCutchen and Garrett Cole. And Garrett Cole's been really big for the Houston Astros. I don't know if Pittsburgh's quite there yet, but this kind of was a head scratcher, not from getting Chris Archer. Now, I think he is controllable for the next few seasons, so even if you don't make it now, you can contend within the next year or two. But they gave up some of their top three players, including some of their top prospects, Glasnow and Austin Meadows. Overall, those moves were kind of head scratchers to me, giving up top prospects for Chris Archer, who has been kind of shaky lately. I think they got the starting pitcher that they wanted, but I wouldn't necessarily have given up what they had to give up to acquire the services of Chris Archer. But Pittsburgh made the moves, and we'll see where that takes them in the National League. So as I recap this trade deadline, I'm going to talk about my winners and losers from the trade deadline. I'm going to start with the winners. LA, obviously number one. I mean, getting Manny Machado, the top guy, I think you're definitely going to go there. Getting Brian Dozier was a nice way to get that as well. I think what the Dodgers are trying to do, knowing what happened in last year's World Series, they went and faced the best offense in all of baseball, despite having the best ERA in baseball, and they lost because of that. And I think that's what they're trying to do. Let's get the bats, and hopefully it can work with us. Even though if they face the Astros again, it might be a different story. It could be a different story for them from a better standpoint. But the Astros still have the hitters, and they also still have they improved on the pitching this year. The Yankees making moves, even if they have to play in a wild card game, they still made the moves to make a deep run. Getting the starting pitching with J-Happ and Lance Lynn, getting some bullpen pieces with Zach Britton. They have the hitters to do it, even though they lost Aaron Judge. I think they, the division races are not done yet, and who knows, maybe the Red Sox go on a bit of a slide, but the Yankees definitely made some moves. I liked Arizona, the response they made after Manny Machado. I think it wasn't what they had to. They didn't have to give up a lot for getting the players they did, and the players they got I thought were great acquisitions. So I think that was overall good. I'm going to go with Tampa Bay. Rebuilding is kind of hard for a fan base. And even though they sold, I think that what they got, the players that they got for the players they traded, especially the Chris Archer move, I think Tampa Bay is in a good position to compete within the next year or two. I know they're not going to compete this year, but the fact that they're above 500, considering the division they're in and how loaded the American League is, it's not a bad. There's only good things that can happen, and I'm going to say maybe not necessarily a winner, but finally making good decisions. The Baltimore Orioles. They've really thought after 2016 that they couldn't compete, but the Red Sox and the Yankees obviously got better. They finally decided to sell, and you have to do it eventually, and I think it was the right move to do it, considering a lot of guys are free agents, especially Manny Machado and Zach Britton. They traded away Jonathan Scoop. They traded away Kevin Gausman, and getting something out of those players is definitely big. They didn't trade one player, and I'll talk about him in a minute. But I think Baltimore made the right move, finally having a fire sale and rebuilding. And now I'm going to talk about the losers in the this trade deadline. The Rockies. They only made one trade in these past couple weeks, and especially what Arizona and LA made, they weren't conservative. I know they probably like the prospects they have, and the starting pitching has done really well for them recently, but I just don't. I think they should have made something more to get. They could have addressed the bullpen. Even though they spent a lot of money in the offseason, they could have addressed that. Maybe they could have improved on the bats wise. I don't know, but I don't think it was a good move. Pittsburgh being buyers when I don't think they're quite there yet, especially after the Archer move. The Nationals, I'll talk about what they did in a minute, but I know Atlanta and Philadelphia are young teams, but they've just been so up and down. And knowing how many free agents you have next year, I would have been sellers personally if I were them and getting something out of return. The Mets, it's been a dumpster fire for them this year. Not, trading a couple players, but the big ones, I would have went out and traded and rebuilt. They think they can contend next season. They want to contend next season, but they just have been unable to stay healthy and to improve on it. And I feel bad for Jacob deGrom, who's having a career year this season despite his win-loss record, but that goes on to the team he's playing with. It's just unfortunate. And then I'd say, to a lesser extent, Milwaukee. All the infielders they acquired way too many infielders, and there's just too many question marks there. So I don't know what happened there. To end my thoughts on the players that were not traded, that were kind of surprised. Zach Wheeler, the Mets didn't sell, like I said before, and he was a player a lot of teams were looking at, but they decided to keep him. I mean, I kind of get why not trading deGrom or Syndergaard. Because those are big guys, and I think it would cost any other team to get him a lot, to get those two players a lot. But I think Wheeler would have been a player I would have sent off if I were the Mets. Adam Jones, he decided not to waive his trade deadline. Listen, I know he loves Baltimore, and he's a free agent at the end of the year, and he might go somewhere else. And he did it from a family standpoint, and just because he's played there his whole career. So I get that. But I think it's still, you criticize players that don't want to go for a contender. And I would have done that even if he didn't, he could go back to Baltimore if he wanted to. Why don't you go out and win a championship? The Phillies wanted to get him, and he decided not to do that. And that's where I'm scratching my head. Matt Harvey, he's been okay with Cincinnati, and I think recently he's trying to up his trade value. Now, he wasn't traded now, but today was only the non-waiver trade deadline. Later in August, we'll have the waiver trade deadline, so he might be moved during that. But he was another player a lot of teams wanted to look at. And then finally, Bryce Harper. Overall, he's had an up and down year, and where the Nationals have been, especially prior to the day of the trade deadline, there was reports coming out that they were going to hear offers on him, and instead, the morning after, they decided, all right, we're not going to do that. It was such a tease to not only the baseball world, but the rest of the general managers. Why would you even do that? I mean, I would have as far as gone out and heard some offers for him, and you didn't have to accept them, but I could have at least heard some offers to see what people were going to offer him. But just overall, I didn't like, that was just, I don't know what the Nationals are doing. To end this video, I'm going to talk about the standings that are currently going on and where it could go in the next 2 months, especially into August. I'll start out with the American League East. The Boston Red Sox are currently leading that division, as they have the best record in all of baseball at 75-34. The Yankees have almost 70 wins, 68-37, 5 games back. Tampa Bay, despite being above 500, they're 20 games back. That's why they sold. Toronto, 9 games below 500, 25 games back. And then Baltimore with the worst record in baseball, 32-75, 42 games back. Moving on to the American League Central, weak division after what's happened in Minnesota and Detroit. Cleveland is leading that division, 10 games above 500. Minnesota in second, 9 games back. Detroit, 13 games back. The White Sox, 21 games back in 4th, and Kansas City 25 games back in last place. So Houston, moving on to the last division in the American League West, Houston has been struggling a little bit as I'm recording this video. They just lost Jose Altuve. He went on the disabled list for the first time in his career. He's been struggling, and the bullpen's kind of, like I said, have kind of had some issues. Despite their great pitching staff with Verlander and Garrett Cole, they had a really bad series against the Texas Rangers, that last place team. But they're leading the division, but it's not far back. Seattle only three games back of them as I'm recording this video. Oakland competing for that second wild card spot, 5 games back. The Angels in 4th at 500, 13 games back, and then Texas 17 games below 500, 21 and a half games back. Moving on to the National League, starting off with the National League East. This has been a tight division race, and it's probably going to be tight just as the National League West is, which I'll get into in a minute. But the Philadelphia Phillies half game up on the Atlanta Braves. The Washington Nationals, after the whooping they put on the Mets tonight, 25-4. Wow, football season, I guess, is approaching. They're 5.5 games back, being 500, so maybe that's why they didn't sell. The Mets, 13.5 games back, and then the Miami Marlins, 14 games back. I mean, personally, I think there's a lot more potential for the Marlins this year over the Mets after this. I mean, despite them having DeGrom, I personally think the Mets are the worst team in that division. National League Central, being a tight division really between 2 teams, though. As of currently, the Cubs half game up on the Milwaukee Brewers, or I think it's tied right now. The Pittsburgh Pirates, 6 games back, not far off from the second wild card spot, which is why they were buyers. St. Louis has been kind of up and down, and I think it's going to continue like that, 7.5 games back. I don't expect the Cardinals to make the playoffs this year. And then Cincinnati in last place with 13.5 games back. In the final division I'm going to talk about, the Los Angeles Dodgers and the Arizona Diamondbacks, tight race along with the Colorado Rockies. The Diamondbacks currently are a half game up on the Dodgers. Actually, believe the Rockies they're a half game up on, and the Dodgers are in third place, tied with the Rockies. But I think from a percentage points, currently the tiebreaker goes over the Rockies. The Giants, who didn't do anything at the trade deadline, even though I don't think they've looked a lot older and have kind of been a little bit off the pace. They're not that far back from the division, only 5 games back. But they weren't sellers and they weren't buyers either, so I don't know what's going to happen there. And their pitching staff took a huge blow, as Johnny Cueto might require Tommy John surgery, so there's some question marks there. And then San Diego in last place, 18.5 games back of the division. Currently in the wild card races in both the leagues, and starting off the American League, the Yankees have a huge lead over the second wild card team, which is the Seattle Mariners, 5.5 games up. The Mariners have that have a lead over the Oakland A's, which is a 2-game lead as of currently I'm recording this video. And they're really the only spot in the American League that needs to be decided. And then in the National League, like I've said before, tight. The Brewers have a 2-game lead over, I believe, the Colorado Rockies or the Dodgers, as I think they're tied for that second wild card spot. The Atlanta Braves are a half game back from that division race, that wild card race, and then Pittsburgh 3.5 games back, and then the Cardinals, Giants are 5 games back, and the Washington Nationals are 5.5 games back. So National League, that wild card race is still pretty much alive, and it's going to come down to the wire. Any news I didn't talk about, and any other big top trades I didn't talk about, leave in the comment section below, as I will respond to that and talk about those trades in the comment section below. Feel free to click like if you like the video, and subscribe if you like the content on my channel. So thanks everybody for watching. Follow me on Twitter at BayLaser96, and I will see you all later.